The prairie lay under a white hush that morning, as if the earth had drawn a blanket across its shoulders and gone to sleep. Frost clung to the grasses like 1,000 tiny daggers of glass. The sky was pale, a faded gray-blue that had forgotten the color of summer. Out on the ridge, a lone barn leaned against the wind, its wooden beams groaning softly, like an old man sighing in his sleep. Inside that barn lived a cowboy with no kin. His name was known to no one that mattered anymore. He had ridden trails, crossed rivers, seen the bones of buffalo scattered like forgotten prayers across the land. Now, he lived in silence, feeding horses and fixing fences, as if each chore were a rosary bead on a string of endless days. He rose early, before the sun had strength to warm the snow. His boots crunched on the hard ground, echoing in the stillness. The world out here did not speak unless spoken to. Even the crows seemed too tired to call. Only the wind carried whispers, curling through the rafters, making the place sound haunted with voices he almost recognized. The cowboy's face bore the years of dust and wind. Lines carved deep as riverbeds traced his cheeks. His eyes, though steady, looked hollowed, as though something once burning bright had gone out long ago. He did not mind the emptiness. Out here, emptiness was a companion. He poured feed into the trough for the horses, their breaths steaming like chimneys in the cold air. He brushed their coats with slow hands, hands that remembered tenderness though they had long since stopped giving it to people. The horses nuzzled him without asking for words. They knew. Animals always know. When his chores were done, he stepped back inside, lit a small fire, and boiled water for coffee that tasted more of smoke than beans. He sat at the table, listening to the flames pop, watching shadows dance on the walls. The world felt the same as yesterday and the day before that, and perhaps tomorrow would look no different. But fate does not always thunder in. Sometimes it tiptoes, wearing the soft shoes of silence. That morning, just as the cowboy lifted his tin mug, he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. Not the groan of wood, not the creak of leather, not the sigh of wind. A fragile crunch, like a sparrow stepping on ice. He set the mug down. His hand went to the rifle leaning against the wall, though he did not raise it. Instead, he moved to the door, opened it slowly, and let the cold rush in. At first, he saw only snow and sky. But then, at the edge of the barn, he noticed a small figure swaying like a shadow about to fall. A child, thin as a reed, wrapped in nothing but torn cloth. Dark hair clung to his face, stiff with frost. His eyes were wide, too wide, the kind of eyes that have seen hunger sharpen its knife. The boy did not speak. He only looked at the cowboy with a mixture of pride and despair, as if daring him to turn away. The cowboy's chest tightened. He had seen starving men before, soldiers on battlefields, miners trapped without bread, drifters who'd lost their way. But a child on the edge of dying, was something his heart had never hardened to. For a moment he stood there, caught between fear and mercy. He knew the stories. A lone cowboy offering shelter to a native child might find himself marked for trouble. Tribes watched their own, and trespasses were rarely forgiven. Yet to send the boy away would be to sign his death in the snow. The silence stretched, heavy as the winter sky. Then, with a slow breath, the cowboy lowered the rifle. He stepped aside, gesturing to the fire inside. No words, just a hand, open, steady, asking nothing, promising only warmth. The boy staggered in, his legs trembling like a newborn colt. He did not fall. Pride held him upright. But once he reached the hearth, he sank to his knees and let the fire kiss the frost from his skin. The cowboy moved quietly. He ladled stew from the pot, a thin broth, but hot and alive with flavor. He tore bread from a loaf gone hard with age and dipped it into the bowl. Setting it down before the child, he did not speak. He simply sat across from him, giving him space to eat, to breathe, to remember what life tasted like. The child's hands shook as he lifted the spoon. He ate slowly at first, like a creature afraid the meal might vanish if taken too quickly. Then hunger overcame pride, and he ate with the desperate grace of survival. The cowboy watched in silence. Each bite seemed to feed something in him, too. A part of himself he had long thought buried. A memory stirred. Of another winter, long ago, when he had been small and hungry, when a stranger had shared bread with him in a roadside shack. That memory had kept him alive, though he had forgotten until this moment. When the child was finished, he slumped against the wall, eyes heavy, belly finally at rest. The cowboy pulled a blanket from his cot and draped it over him. Still no words. None were needed. The fire spoke enough. Hours passed like that. The only sound the crackle of wood and the soft breathing of the child as sleep claimed him. The cowboy sat with his coffee, watching the flames climb and curl. And as he sat, he felt something shift inside. Not joy, not yet, but the faint stirring of warmth where once there had only been emptiness. Outside, the prairie lay in silence. But inside the barn, something had begun. Something fragile. Something that, by morning, might change the course of more than just one lonely man's life. Morning arrived with the sound of snow sliding from the barn roof. The land still lay white and endless, but a faint gold light bled across the horizon, soft as a candle's breath. The cowboy stirred the embers of the fire, coaxing them back to life. His breath fogged in the cold air, mingling with smoke as though his soul, too, was trying to rise. He poured water into the pot, the simple ritual of coffee a comfort against the silence. Behind him, a rustle. The child sat up, wrapped in the blanket like a cocoon. His face was sharp, hunger still painted across his cheeks, yet his eyes had a steady flame now. Not just survival, watchfulness. The boy scanned the room, taking in every detail as though to memorize it. The cowboy slid a tin plate of bread toward him. No words. The boy hesitated, then took it. He ate slower than last night, not frantic, but measured, like someone who knew food was no longer a dream. The cowboy watched, not with pity, but with recognition. Hunger was a language he had once spoken fluently. Hours passed in quiet rhythm. The boy followed him to the stable, watched him brush the horses, even reached a small hand out to stroke the mane of a chestnut mare. The horse lowered its head, snorting gently, accepting the touch. A bond, silent but real, formed between the child and the creatures of the barn. The cowboy did not press questions, but he noticed things, the way the boy's gaze lingered on the hills beyond the barn, the way his ears tilted at distant sounds, as if listening for something the cowboy could not hear. By midday, a rider came down the trail, a trader the cowboy knew in passing. The man stopped only to swap news, his words spilling quick as water. He spoke of tribes moving restless in the valleys, of warriors seen crossing the river at night. He spoke of hunters going missing, of whispers that white men had taken more than the land would allow. The cowboy said little, just nodded, spat into the snow, and let the man ride on. But his mind churned. He glanced at the boy, who had gone very still during the trader's talk, as if every word were a stone laid on his chest. When the rider vanished, the boy finally spoke. His voice was thin but steady, shaped by a tongue the cowboy barely knew, yet the meaning found its way through. He said he was lost, said the hunt had gone wrong, said the snow had swallowed him, and hunger had nearly claimed him. The cowboy did not ask more. Sometimes the whole truth comes in fragments, not in floods. That evening, as the fire licked the walls again, the boy offered something unexpected. With small, careful fingers, he braided the mane of the cowboy's horse. Each twist was slow, precise, filled with quiet gratitude. The cowboy sat nearby, whittling a stick, pretending not to watch. But inside, his chest ached with something unnamed. It had been years since another soul had given him a gift, however small. Later, he lay on his cot, staring at the rafters, unable to sleep. He thought of his own boyhood, of hunger, yes, but also of a night when he had been found near frozen by a stranger who asked no questions, gave him bread, and disappeared into memory. That one kindness had carved a scar of light inside him. Perhaps, without knowing, he was now repaying a debt carried across decades. But debts in the West rarely came without weight. Just before dawn, he woke to a sound, faint, distant, yet sharp. The drumming of hooves across snow. He rose, stepped outside, and looked toward the horizon. The land was wide, the hills pale with moonlight. And there, far off, he saw them, shapes on horseback, dark against the snow, unmoving. Watching, he stood there for a long time, breath steaming in the cold. The riders did not approach. They only waited, silent as stones. When he finally returned inside, the boy was awake, eyes wide, as if he too had felt their gaze from miles away. The cowboy said nothing. He only stoked the fire, but his hands trembled slightly. The wind whistled through the cracks of the barn, carrying with it something more than cold. A warning, a whisper that the prairie itself was holding its breath. And so the days turned. The boy grew stronger, his steps firmer, his voice steadier. The cowboy found himself teaching how to saddle a horse, how to mend leather, how to listen to silence without fear. Small lessons, stitched into the fabric of their days like threads of trust. Yet always at dusk, he felt it, eyes on him from the distance. Shadows slipping across the ridges. Rumors carried by the wind. The boy said little, but when the cowboy looked into his eyes, he saw it, the knowing. The boy understood what the cowboy dared not speak aloud. Something was coming, and the prairie, wide and white and endless, was holding its breath for the storm. The days slid by like clouds across the prairie sky, each one carrying the weight of silence. The boy no longer staggered when he walked. His cheeks filled with a little color, his eyes carried steadier fire. Yet beneath that new strength, a shadow lived, the kind of shadow not cast by light, but by memory. The cowboy saw it in the way the boy sometimes stared into the fire, lips pressed tight, as if holding back words that might burn if spoken. He saw in the way the boy's ears tilted toward the hills at night, catching sounds the cowboy could not hear. One evening, with the wind howling low through the cracks of the barn, the boy finally let the truth spill. Not all at once, but in fragments like stones dropped into still water. He was not just a stray, not just a hunter lost in snow. He was son to a leader, blood of a chief, whose name carried weight across valleys and rivers. He had wandered from a hunting party, driven by hunger, lost in storm. His kin had searched, but the land had swallowed him. When he collapsed outside the barn, he had been closer to death than to life. The cowboy sat still as the words reached him, the fire painting his face in amber light. For a long while, he said nothing. His hands rested heavy on his knees, his eyes fixed on the flames. To shelter a child was one thing. To shelter the son of a chief was another. It was no small act of kindness now, but a thread woven into the fate of two worlds. Fear stirred in him, sharp and cold. He had heard the trader's words, felt the eyes on the ridges. If the tribe thought harm had come to the boy, his barn would be no refuge. It would be a grave. The boy seemed to sense his thoughts. He shifted closer, his small hand resting against the cowboy's rough palm. No words, just that touch. It was trust, raw and undeserved. And in that moment, the fear eased, though it did not vanish. The cowboy chose, not with speeches, not with vows, just with the simple act of staying. He would not send the boy away. Whatever storm was gathering, he would meet it head on. In the days that followed, the bond between them deepened in quiet ways. The cowboy taught the boy how to carve wood with a steady knife, shaping scraps into little figures of horses. He showed him how to saddle and unsaddle, how to listen to a horse's breathing like a heartbeat. He taught him the rhythm of chores, work that kept a man alive when the world tried to grind him down. The boy, in turn, shared pieces of his own world. He showed the cowboy how to braid horsehair into strong cords. He taught him words in his tongue, names for wind, for river, for fire, soft syllables that tasted of earth and sky. The cowboy stumbled over them, gruff voice breaking their shape, and the boy laughed, the sound light and new, cutting through the barn's old silence like a bird's song in spring. For a man who had lived alone so long, that laughter was more than sound. It was reminder. It was proof that loneliness could be broken. Yet even as warmth grew, so did the shadow. At night, when the moon carved silver lines across the snow, the cowboy heard it, the echo of drums faint and far. Sometimes it was only in his head. Sometimes the boy's eyes widened, proving it was real. And always the riders on the ridges, dark shapes against the horizon, unmoving, watching. The boy whispered once, his voice barely a breath. They know. That was all. The cowboy did not ask more. He did not need to. The meaning was plain as the stars above them. One evening, as snow fell soft as ash, the cowboy stood at the barn door, staring at the empty trail. He felt the weight of choice heavy upon him. He could run, saddle his best horse, ride into the hills, vanish as he had done before when trouble loomed. But as he looked back at the boy asleep by the hearth, wrapped in the blanket, his chest answered for him. He would not run. Instead, he prepared, not with bullets or barricades, with bread, with blankets, with firewood stacked high, and food laid out as though to welcome, not to fight. It was a strange thing, to ready himself not for war, but for meeting. He polished the table with a rag, mended a tear in the blanket, even swept the barn floor until the boards showed through. If he was to be judged, let it be in truth. That night, before sleep, the boy rose and came to him. He did not speak. He only clasped the cowboy's hand, small fingers curling tight around his weathered knuckles. The cowboy looked down at him, something burning sharp in his throat. That simple gesture spoke louder than words. Trust, gratitude, a bond forged not of blood, but of kindness. When dawn finally came, pale and cold, the cowboy stepped outside. And there it was. Across the valley, the horizon moved. Riders, rows upon rows, horses dark against snow, their breath rising like steam from an army of spirits. 200 strong at least. The earth itself seemed to hum beneath their hooves. The cowboy did not flinch. He stood with the barn at his back, the boy still sleeping inside, and watched the storm gather. He had given kindness into the world. Now the world would decide what to return. Morning bled across the land in shades of gray and gold, the kind of dawn that feels more like a warning than a promise. The air was sharp, every breath cutting like glass. Snow lay heavy on the ground, yet the silence was heavier still. And into that silence came the thunder. From the far horizon, riders flowed like a dark tide. Horses moved in unison, their hooves shaking the frozen earth. 200 warriors, cloaked in furs, feathers catching the wind, faces painted with the stories of their people. Their lines stretched wide, swallowing the valley, their presence heavy as a mountain sliding into view. The cowboy stood at the barn door alone. His rifle leaned against the wall inside, untouched. He wore no weapon, carried no shield, just a weathered coat, a steady gaze, and a heart that beat louder than the drumming hooves. He did not step forward. He did not hide. He simply stood, like a tree refusing to bend in the storm. Behind him, the boy stirred. Small footsteps padded across the wooden floor, and then he was there, standing just inside the doorway, blanket still draped across his shoulders. His eyes lit with something fierce, something bright, the recognition of home. The warriors drew close, slowing their thunder into silence. Snow swirled between horse and barn, a curtain of white breath. Not a word was spoken, not a sound but the soft snort of horses and the whisper of wind through feathers. Then the line broke. From it rode a single man, tall, broad, his face marked with age and power. His horse carried itself like a king. The man dismounted, boots sinking into snow, and walked forward with the weight of a mountain in each step. The cowboy did not move. His hands hung calm at his sides, though every nerve in his body screamed. The chief stopped a few paces away, his eyes, dark and steady, fixed on the cowboy. For a heartbeat, the world held still. 2 men, 2 lives, 2 worlds staring across the narrow space between them. And then, a sound broke the silence. The boy. He ran from the doorway, stumbling through the snow, straight into the arms of the chief. The man caught him, lifting him with a strength both fierce and tender. For a moment, warrior and child held each other, the snow falling thick around them, erasing the distance of days lost. The cowboy watched, his chest tight, unsure if this was salvation or doom. The chief looked at him once more. Slowly, he set the boy down, keeping a hand on his shoulder. Then, in a voice deep as the earth, he spoke words that carried across the still air. The boy translated, halting but clear. You gave life to my son when death was near. For this I have come." The cowboy waited, heart braced. The boy's voice shook, but his eyes were bright. They did not come for war. They came to honor. The cowboy's shoulders eased, though his knees trembled beneath the weight of relief. He bowed his head slightly, not in weakness, but in respect. And then the strangest thing happened. The warriors dismounted, one by one. They lined the barn, not with weapons raised, but with open hands. They left gifts, blankets, meat-crafted tools, feathers bound with care. They placed them in the snow as tokens of gratitude, silent offerings heavy with meaning. The cowboy, who had so little, stood stunned before abundance he had not asked for. His throat burned, but no words came. The chief stepped closer, placing a hand on the cowboy's shoulder. It was not a grip of power, but of recognition. A warrior's nod, from one protector to another. "You gave kindness," the boy whispered, repeating the chief's words. "Now, kindness returns." The cowboy swallowed hard. For years, he had lived empty, hollow as the barn around him. Now, in this moment, the emptiness cracked wide open, filled with something he had forgotten could exist, belonging. The warriors lingered only long enough to leave their thanks. Then, like the tide retreating, they mounted and turned toward the horizon. Hooves thundered once more, but softer now, like the heartbeat of the earth returning to rest. The chief lingered last. He lifted the boy onto his horse, but the child turned, eyes locked on the cowboy. In them burned gratitude, trust, and something deeper, the bond of two souls who had shared the fire of survival. The chief gave a final nod. Then horse and rider joined the line, fading into the snowy distance until they were but shadows swallowed by light. And just like that, the valley was quiet again. The cowboy stood in the silence, breath steaming in the cold, gifts at his feet, the echo of hooves still trembling in his bones. The barn behind him felt less empty, the air less sharp, his heart less hollow. He turned back inside, stoked the fire, and for the first time in years, he let himself smile. Because kindness, once given, had returned to him not as a whisper, but as a chorus. Kindness is not a small thing in a world that teaches men to be hard. Out here, a single act can echo across valleys, can mend cracks carved deep by history. A starving child, a lone cowboy, a choice made in silence. And from that choice, a storm of gratitude instead of war. So remember, friend by the fire, every hand you open, every kindness you give, it will find its way back. Perhaps not today, perhaps not tomorrow, but someday, in a way you cannot imagine. If this story touched your heart, let its fire travel further. Like this tale? Share it, and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Every voice adds to this great circle around the campfire, and every kindness is a bridge across the wide, wild world.